So, first of all, thank you, everyone who's on the call right now, for joining us. This is a briefing by Mitviim. We're the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policy in Israel. And today, what we really want to focus on is our annual index. So, Mitviim works as a think tank in Israel, and we work to further Israel's goals in regional belonging, creating peace with Palestinians, and generally dealing with Israel's foreign policy. And we're hoping, to promote belonging in the region and to move forward to a better state than we are in today, especially given the right-wing government that we have right now. There's a certain approach to foreign policy that doesn't necessarily align with what most Israelis view as the actions that we should be taking right now. So going into the Foreign Policy Index for 2023, this is something we've been doing actually since 2012, which is amazing. We do it in conjunction with FES. They're a wonderful partner of ours. And we also have worked with the Rafi Smith Institute to conduct these findings every single year. So when we created this policy index, and what we aim to do every year is ask a series of questions to the Israeli public to garner their understanding and their views on different aspects of foreign policy, whether that be, Israel's relationship with the US or the region around us, or even more internally, how they're feeling about things. So what we really want to do is analyze the changing trends year over year and see how they've changed, how they've stayed the same is also very important for some of us. And today, what we'll be going into is each one of our amazing experts, who I'll introduce in a second, are going to go over different findings that each one of them has found particularly interesting and noteworthy to discuss today. Our first speaker is going to be Dr. Gil Marciano, our CEO. Gil, you want to give a little wave?
Hi.
So Gil is going to be talking really about the foreign policy gap that we see today, between the general public and what the government's policies are actually. And he's also going to touch a little bit on the Iranian nuclear threat. Next, we have Dr. Omer Zanani, who is the Director of Israeli-Palestinian Peacemaking within Mitviim. And he's going to be speaking about the Israeli public views on the Palestinian issue, including Israeli aid, joint coordination mechanisms, maybe working with the Jordanians, things like that. Then we will go on to Dr. Moran Zaga. Moran Zaga is our policy fellow and an expert on the Gulf states. She's going to be speaking mainly about regional belonging, including normalization with Palestinians, with Saudi Arabia, and how those will take us to the next steps. Then we're going to have Dr. Maya Tzion. Hi, Maya. That is our Director of Israel-Europe Relations, and she's going to be speaking about the changing attitudes regarding the EU and the most important countries that we have a relationship with, and so forth. And last, we're going to wrap it up with Reef Yitzhaki over here. He is our Director of External Relations and Government Relations, and he's really going to be focusing today on the judicial reform and how that impacts our relationship with the West, and how Israelis feel in the wider question of annexation, how this is going to come to play. So I'm going to pass it along to Gil, and you can get started.
Sure thing. Thank you very much, Frankie. So as Frankie mentioned, we have a very wide range of topics. We are in this specific survey, we are touching different issues from Kiev to Tehran all the way to Gaza, Hawara, and other locations. But I think this year is especially important for those of you who follow this specific survey in the last couple of years. Not just because we are experiencing a government that's really trying to challenge the status quo on a number of different issues, but mainly I would say because the current Netanyahu-Smotrich government, one of the things they focus on is claiming a public mandate based on the last election, which is not just relevant for the judicial so-called reform, but also in promoting what we define as a full-fledged right-wing foreign policy and a very distinct policy towards vis-a-vis the Palestinians. It won't come as news to you, of course, that we are referring to an attempt by this government to openly negate the two-state solution, to claim an exclusive right for the Jewish people between the sea and the river, basically on the entire Eretz Israel. And therefore, the examining the public views when this government is about 9 months into its term is quite important. And I think the bottom line, the most important insight from the survey, is a clear divide between the general public, the public views in Israel, and these government policies and mindset, which I would say in the most basic level shows itself, and you can see the graphs here, in a very low grade to the performance given to the performance of this government on all matters relating to foreign policy. You know, we are referring to the lowest grade in the last 7 years. We've been conducting this survey during the last 11 years. I would also mention an important issue here. This survey is representative, the sample is representative of the political divide or the political division in Israel. So about 70% of the respondents define themselves as right wing. And still, what we see today is a very low performance review in comparison with last year, but even more importantly, in comparison to the previous Netanyahu governments. Foreign policy was always the electoral bastion of Netanyahu in the past. We all remember, and we've seen the last speech by Netanyahu at the General Assembly just a couple of days ago, the old attempt to leverage or to use external legitimacy, Netanyahu's image in the world in order to gain domestic legitimacy, especially important this year when this government is suffering from a legitimacy crisis. Our findings shows that it's going to be much tougher in the past. It's going to be a much a bigger challenge, and especially because of the foreign policy issues, no longer serving as a safe zone, but maybe as another open wound electorally for this government. And we see the same trends going into the concept, I mean, in the Israeli grade or the Israeli assessment of Israel standing in the world, which again, one of the lowest since we started the survey. And if we can move forward, one of the core issues is when it comes to Israel-US relations. And here we see really some of the lowest results. The interesting thing is that beyond just a general discontent with the government's policies and positions, I would say that we see a major gap, a conceptual gap, between the public and these government policies and attitudes when it comes to key foreign policy issues. And here I'm only providing, the preview for the points that are going to be closely examined by our experts later on, but a couple of core issues from the preferred strategy towards the Palestinians, the way we treat the PA, the Palestinian Authority. Is the PA, does the continued existence of the Palestinian Authority serve the Israeli interest? You ask Smotrich, absolutely not. But you will see later on that only 13% supports his view. On issues of Jerusalem and the attempt to challenge the status quo there, on issues relating to cooperation with the Palestinians as a whole. And one of the things that Moran, Dr. Zaga is going to mention later on, even when we speak about normalization, really the safe zone, the great success of the right wing in the last couple of years, of Netanyahu himself even as a statement, even then we see a major divide between the attitude of this government and between the public attitude, specifically on the very relevant topic of whether or not Israel should leverage normalization to promote Israeli-Palestinian peace, to promote an Israeli-Palestinian political process. As Moran will mention, we even see the difference when it comes to the Saudi deal and the willingness of the Israeli public to offer real steps, concrete steps in order to see this normalization through. So we see a number of different issues. Reef is going to touch upon the very interesting finding, I think, especially for international audience, diplomatic and media, when it comes to the effect of Western criticism of the judicial reform and whether or not Israelis, how do they treat this specific issue? And here again, we see how the Israeli government attempts to describe the topic as a domestic issue. Mind your own business, as Shikli, one of the ministers mentioned before. We see a completely different approach from the public. And last but not least, maybe we'll move to the next slide, because nobody wants to pick up the Iranian topic. So I'm always I'm always the one left with the wild card, the wild Iranian card on this issue. But this is one of the most surprising ones because Netanyahu and his government made the opposition to any kind of diplomatic solution, to seeking a diplomatic solution with Iran on the nuclear, to stop the nuclear efforts into somewhat of a trademark. Not just supporting it, but one of the dynamos of maximum pressure. And one of the interesting things with to be honest, the failure of this policy, with Iran reaching this year a status of a nuclear threshold, really, a state, you also see a change in Israeli public views about the entire matter. And we see that almost 50% of the public, including an overriding majority in those who define themselves as center right or moderate right, support the diplomatic route as the primary means for a last minute attempt to stop the Iranian race to the bomb. And only a quarter support a military approach. By the way, another interesting thing that we can pick up later on, there's almost 16% that says that we should come to terms with the nuclear Iran, which is, just very surprising in the evolution of Israeli public mindset. So all of those things together, okay, if we combine the dissatisfaction together with these conceptual gaps, I think that we can define this government as a minority government, a political minority government when it comes to foreign policy. And that's a major issue when we examine right now the disposition of Israel and Netanyahu when it comes to the Saudi deal, when it comes to the future relation with the US, on a number of different issues. So I'll stop here and I'll pass the baton back to Frankie.
Yes, thank you, Frankie. Thank you, Gil. Thank you all. I'll go deeper into the data and the solutions that we found in 5 slides, with your permission. I'll start with the one on the left, which is the classical slide that talks about the preferred strategy for the Israeli-Palestinian solution. And here, on the one hand, we see a drop, still a drop to 36% that promotes the two-state solution. You see the picture of Abu Mazen in the middle. So it's still a drop, and we have to remember it. I think the main reason for that is the 25% that you see on the green side, which are the no option, because there's no agenda, there's no real political agenda on the center and on the left in Israel. And this is a very important point. Of course, it's an assessment of mine, but it's very clear, and it will look to you much clearer when we talk about the other slides. But this is the one thing that I want to show you. The other thing, Gil mentioned it, is the higher number that supports the one-state solution. And this is very frightening to my eyes. The 28% supports the Jewish supremacy, which is too high, if you ask me, in the Israeli public. It's a much bigger number than it used to be in the past, but also 11% that supports the one state, the equal one state, from the sea to the river, from the extreme left wing. So we have here numbers that are a reflection of, let's say, a strategy which is very clear on the side of the right wing, the Smotrich plan, of the decision plan from 2017. And on the other hand, we don't have a real agenda on the left and on the side of the center. I think it would change very much the numbers. Now, the second slide that you see on the right, Gil mentioned it, we see here a very clear and loud message of the public to the Netanyahu government. The public understand, and you can see from the 32 and the 11% that are supporting the PA, understand the importance of the Palestinian Authority to the interest, the national interest of Israel. And this is a very, very clear message. You see only 13% that supports the government's, let's say, the government's agenda of seeing the PA as the real enemy of Israel. So this is a really loud and clear message. Reef, please go to the next slide. Frankie. Thank you. Frankie mentioned the Jerusalem issue. This is a specific issue that we can see here, how the public is eager, yearning for calmity and for stability. You see here 61% prefer, let's say, a regional mechanism with the Jordanians, the Palestinians, and Israel, which does not exist today, of calming things in Jerusalem, especially in the Temple Mount. And this is a very important number. Again, shows that the public is very pragmatic and very eager to stability. But when it comes to long-range solutions, we see different views. On the right side of the slides, you can see another example of how the public understands the importance, first, the importance of the Palestinian Authority. 52% of the public supports independent electricity, energy, infrastructure for the Palestinian Authority, which means less dependency on Israel, which is very important for the independence, or for the futuristic independence of the Palestinian. On the other side, we also see an understanding of the public of the importance of the climate change and of sustainability. And please, let's go to the last slide. Talking about the Gaza Strip. Again, for me, it was a very surprising numbers. Now you can see here from Musra, from Khan Yunis, upper going to northern Gaza Strip, you see the numbers all together, the 24, 17, and 15 are all numbers of the public that wants stability in the Gaza Strip, even when it's not it's not equaling to the strategy of the government of today. 27% are supporting the strategy, the existing strategy of today, but most of the public wants a change, a real change towards Hamas. 15% support negotiations with Hamas, which is very surprising. 17% are talking about working together with the PA to bring it back to the Gaza Strip, and 24% believes in rehabilitation of the Gaza Strip.
But Moran, you are good to go. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Frankie, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm glad that I got a chance to speak after Omer, because I think most of the issues are aligned with are mirroring to what we just heard. And in general remark, I can say that looking at the whole poll, the whole questionnaire, I see that Israel is a very politically aware. They're very pragmatic, in my view. And we can see that also in terms of their view on Israel's policy towards the Arab countries. We see that, especially in the question before getting to this graph, of whether should we be in relations or not with democratic states. And most of the normalization states, as known, are not democratic, and 58% voted that we should not consider the regime type when we establish relations with other states. So pragmatism is one of the key characteristics, that I've seen in the answers. Now, about the question of which region Israel is belonged to, and this is something that I also developed in an academic research. It is known that many Israelis still hold the imaginary perception that Israel is an island. Of course, we're not an island, but there's an island perception because we're so disconnected from our neighborhood. And along the years, we saw that not more than third of the Israelis thought that Israel is part of the Middle East. Now, this is on a rising trend. We see that increases along the years, but not so much, still in very small numbers. And if we combine the Israelis who think that Israel is more affiliated or connected, even physically, to Europe and to the Mediterranean, we see a majority here. So we still have work to do in order to implement the idea within the Israeli public, and also not only the public, but also in the institutions, that we are part of the Middle East. And over the last 3 years, we see a gradual shift and a gradual, let's say, establishment or institutionalization of this process, where more departments, more jobs and positions are being designated in the governmental institution to work specifically with the Middle East countries. We see that in the Ministry of Science and in the IDF. We see that everywhere. So this is a growing trend, and without seeing the future, I do believe that that we're going to see that Israel is more and more part of the Middle East in the imaginary perception of Israelis along the years, as the normalizations or even talk of normalization is spreading here. Now, if we can roll on to the next slide, we see that 61% on the left graph think that that Israel should use countries like the UAE or Bahrain to promote peace with the Palestinians. Now, first, I'm very optimistic to see this result, because it means that majority of the people who are questioned here are being part of the right wing. It means that they're, even being on the right wing, they still support peace. And this is a very optimistic way to look at these numbers at all. Now, there is a very, very significant increasing trend here from 2 years ago to today, from 53 to 61% who think that Arab countries should be brokers, should moderate, should mediate between Israel and the Palestinians. We are not stuck anymore in the traditional perception that only the US can be a broker here. And more countries are coming into this interplay. It was 3 years ago, the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco. Adding to that, the very, very high motivation of Jordan and Egypt to be brokers, but now the Saudis would like to be brokers, and they're part of the game now. So more and more countries are coming into the region, wants to be broker, and Israel is more willing. And as we can see here, the Israelis are more willing to accept this offer. About the right graph, you see that the question of price. It's very nice that many Israelis want peace, but would they take peace in any price? And we see that even though it takes half and half, 40 and 41% who thinks that normalization with Saudi Arabia should take into account or should be on the price of halting settlement constructions, of just changing the policy in the West Bank. So for me, in this question, 41% is a lot. It means that they give an open card to Netanyahu. A lot of Israelis give an open card to Netanyahu to go forward with the Saudis, even under the price of halting the settlements and changing the Israeli policy towards the settlement and expansion in the West Bank. I am not sure, and I asked Maya before what her opinion is. I'm not sure if the same open card would work with the European Union, for example. So we see here a high motivation to work to establish this normalization with the Saudis. So this is another insight from this result. Lastly, we see that there is another reference between the normalization countries and the Palestinian issue. Should the criticism on from the UAE or Bahrain or Morocco should affect the general policy of Israel towards the Palestinians? And we see here also very similar numbers, 37 and 39. But I want to take something out of it that you cannot see here in the numbers, and this is the gap between the Jewish audience and the Arab sector who answered this question. And we see that 59, almost 60% of the Arabs who answered this question thought that Israel should consider the UAE and Bahrain's opinion about Israel's policy in the West Bank or to the Palestinians in general, while only 35% of the Jews thought that we should not consider that. This is even more significant when seeing this gap between Arabs and Jews respondents in the question of whether we should not respond. So we should not consider their view, and only 11% of the Arabs thought that we should not consider that, while 42% of the Jews thought that we can just ignore them. I would like to take, if I have 1 or 2 more minutes, to speak about something that we don't see here. Okay, I see a nodding. Okay. Gil mentioned before the Iranian nuclearization, and I want to add something on that because I was looking on the gap between the Jewish and the Arab sectors of the respondents, and I saw that also here we see a major gap between the respondents, and we see that more Israelis are, I would say, in my opinion, are in denial when talking about the Iranian nuclearization, and are more militant, because we see that more Jews, or let's say, I would go on the opposite way, more Arabs are willing to acknowledge the reality and prepare to a nuclear era, where Iranian is a nuclear state. And we can see the gap here between 36% of the Arabs who are willing to acknowledge that, and 12 Jews who are willing to acknowledge that, meaning that we are still in denial. And whether we should act militarily or not towards Iran, also here we see a huge gap. While only 7% of the Arabs think we should attack Iran, 28 of the Jews think we should attack Iran. So I'll end with that, and thank you for listening.
Frankie, just to enhance the point that was made by Moran, if I may, Moran mentioned in regards to the Saudis, just very shortly, if you can go back 2 slides. 1 more? Yes. I mean, Moran made a very good point about the fact that 41% is huge when it comes to the number. Because again, we are talking about a topic that right now is presented as a complete science fiction from this government point. I mean, we actually ask here about a concrete step, evacuating settlements, stopping outpost, stopping. The interesting thing is that almost half of Likud voters, those respondents that said that they voted for Likud, do not resist, do not oppose this specific solution. And that's before Netanyahu even uttered or mentioned that he supports such a... Something happens to the Israeli public where the Saudi deal is brought on the table. Something, I wouldn't say fundamental, but something at least in the instinct. And that's something interesting to take from this fascinating, and very relevant to the discussion today. Sorry, Moran. Sorry, I just wanted to strengthen your point.
Thank you, Gil, and thank you so much, Moran. Before we move on to Maya, I do just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them at the very end.
Good evening, everybody. I would like to respond to Moran, to what she was saying about, is it the USA that would promote the peace agreement or with normalization with Saudi Arabia, whether it would have been the EU behind that deal, and then the Israeli public would have not been, she assumed that it wouldn't have gained so much support to EU initiatives. And I want to say it's not an either-or question, it has become an and question. There's a major deal being fostered between the United States, obviously Saudi Arabia and Israel, but the EU is backing the United States position and would like to actually join forces with the Saudi peace initiative and put on the table the special privilege partnership to revive the special privilege partnership that was on the table in 2013 for the Israelis, for the Palestinians. I think the Israeli public is not aware of that. It's not a major debate. The Israeli government has not related to it in 2013. So I'm just saying it's not an either or. And Frankie, if we can go to the next slide, or Reef. And as some of you may know, since 2018, our foreign policy index has been asking, is the European Union more a friend or an adversary to Israel? And in 2018, the numbers were startling. Only 18% thought that the EU is a friend. Up till 2022, we saw a major improvement to 33%, meaning that there was a 21% increase. And this is also the result this year in 23. 33% actually see the EU more as a friend of Israel than an adversary. We can observe the complementary trend with the decrease in percentages of Israelis who see the EU as an adversary, a decline from 55% in 2018 to 39% this year. It's a bit slower decline, only minus 16%, but it's steady. We also can observe that more than a quarter of Israelis actually don't have an opinion, and perhaps this is because of the levels of knowledge about the EU that are quite low in Israel. They are also quite low in the European Union. It's a complex, complicated entity. In one of the most turbulent years that in Israel has experienced internally, with a judicial overhaul, these numbers reflect a surprisingly calm year in EU-Israeli relations. There were no big conflicts between the Israeli government and the EU this year. Most of the time, the EU kept silent regarding the judicial overhaul, with the exception of canceling Europe Day reception due to Ben-Gvir's expected, he was appointed to be the speaker on behalf of the government. And by keeping silent on the issue of democracy and separation of powers, the EU kept itself out of the anti-EU bashing circle. There seemed to be less EU declarations regarding settlements, and even though it was the deadliest year since 2005 when it comes to Palestinians being killed, the EU is more quiet than it used to be on those matters. And then the Israeli government, which has the most Eurosceptic ministers and members of Knesset ever, is also keeping quiet for the time being when it comes to the European Union. And this is mostly reflected in the media and I guess public opinion. So it's somewhat a bizarre coexistence. There were also no big positive events in EU-Israeli relations, and that could explain to some extent the stability in public opinion. So Association Council happened last year in October under the former government. And in May, Eli Cohen, the foreign minister, visited Brussels. He met Joseph Borrell, the high representative. It was a surprisingly pleasant meeting between the two of them. They seem to get along very well, to the extent that Foreign Minister Cohen even invited Borrell to come and visit Jerusalem and the Palestinian Authority. And just last week, when they met at the United Nations General Assembly, they actually scheduled it to take place at the beginning of December. That would be the first visit of Borrell in Israel and in the Palestinian Authority since he came to his position in November 2019. So I think it's quite remarkable. If you can go to the next slide, we can see two follow-up questions to the friend-adversary question. It is a new set of questions that we asked for the first time in Mitvim's Foreign Policy Index. And look first at the left side of the slide. We asked those 33% who said that the EU is more a friend to Israel. We asked them why. Why do you view the EU more as a friend? And each respondent could choose 2 out of 4 answers. So 48 shows an economic transactional relations reason and said that it was because the EU was the main trading partner of Israel. Same transactional approach with 34% knew and cherish the EU-Israeli scientific cooperation, and it's much more than the percentage of population in Israel that directly enjoys Horizon Europe funds. The other two options given were value-based and normative answers. So 44%, and that was interesting, quite high, said that they see the EU as a friend due to its liberal democratic positions. Now, remember, it's only the ones who saw the EU as a friend. So only 44% of them said gave that as an answer. And again, this is interesting because the EU actually stayed out of the judicial overhaul debate, and it was actually the member states, the leaders of the member states, such as Emmanuel Macron, Olaf Scholz, even Rishi Sunak, who is they are no longer in the EU, and they were the ones criticizing Netanyahu over the judicial overhaul and put emphasis on shared democratic values. The answer referring to the position of the EU regarding the peace process with the Palestinians actually received the lowest number among the ones who think that the EU is a friend of Israel. Only 19% of them thought that was, chose it as a reason for their answer. So it seems that this is far less important for them to conceive the EU as a friend. I'm not sure whether that reflects the decreasing size of the peace camp in Israel in general. Is that the lack of appreciation for the EU's position and actions to help the Palestinian Authority and keep the two-state solution alive? If there less of awareness of what the EU is doing, I'm not sure. We'll need to conduct focus groups or other means to know about why it's so low. And if you see on the right side, we see the reply of those 39% who conceive the EU more as an adversary. And here, when given 4 options to choose why, the overwhelmingly majority of 69% chose the EU position regarding the peace process with the Palestinians. 42% chose its position regarding the settlement, which is kind of a complementary answer to the first choice. 32% chose its position regarding Iran, the JCPOA, which we discussed beforehand, and only 22% chose the EU's funding of civil society organizations in Israel. So I think that's an interesting picture of how the right wing public in Israel, that most of them are the ones viewing EU as an adversary, think. Why do they think so? And to the last slide, shortly. Thank you. So, and take a look at the left. We like to begin at the left side in between. So this year, for the first time since we began to ask why are the who are the most important countries for Israel after the United States? For the first time, Germany came as first answer. Now here on the slide, you see a calculation of the 3 answers that each respondent could give. But as first reply, Germany received 14.6% and Russia only 14.2%. And when we added the second and the third reply, only then Russia received 31.8% and Germany the 31.4% that you can see here on the screen. Now, it used to be the case that Russia was clearly first, but this year, Russia's status declined from around 40% that it was last year to 32% this year. Germany, that used to stand at 28% last year, actually increased to the 31.4%. And you can see the order of importance. UK came third with 28%, China came fourth with 26%, Egypt with 21%, France 20%, Jordan actually increased from 7% last year to 12% this year, and Saudi Arabia remained stable. And I remind you that the poll was conducted in July. Perhaps if it was conducted today, the numbers would have increased. And on the right side of the slide, we asked for the second time after last year regarding the war in Ukraine. And here we asked what is the preferable option for Israel to do. There are no major changes, just slightly different percentages. So we see a decrease, or we see an increase of, decrease of supporters that continue to wish that Israel would walk between the drops, so as not to avoid upsetting Russia. but it's less than 53% last year, and it's indicating there is less fear, I guess, of Russia. And that correlates to the trend in public opinion that I mentioned earlier, that Russia is no longer the first, or very shortly the first most important country for Israel after the United States. The numbers of the one who think Israel should fully support Ukraine increased slightly from 28% to 33% this year. So thank you for your attention.
All right. Okay. So thank you very much, Frankie. And every we include 4 primary research areas, basically Israel's foreign affairs apparatus and Israel's relations in the region with the Palestinians. But this year we couldn't ignore from a very prominent subject topic, which is the judicial overall. So I will explain a little bit about the infographics here. So I will start with the left one. Maybe I will start generally. So since the judicial overall has been presented, so it was subject to numerous unending protests and demonstrations in Israel and abroad. We're talking about an awakening of a new political power, the Israeli liberal camp, which comprehends the severe consequences of these anti-liberal legislative proposals on the judiciary, the media, civil society organizations, and in general on the democratic fabric of Israel society. So I have for you today 3 takes based on the findings from the survey and also from my interpretation of the current event. So we will start with the left infographic here. So for many years, Israel has been subject to this international criticism in cases that are related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, mostly. And however, the international community didn't implement such strict measures against Israel's occupation policy. You can even say it's like because of the liberal democratic backbone and mechanisms of Israel, precautions that were taken by previous governments, or even this international image of Netanyahu as a responsible leader in the region. But this is not the case anymore, because the judicial overhaul is perceived, or like the Western allies, our Western allies are starting to concern from the consequences of this judicial overhaul. And many of them stated that it will affect the relations with Israel, because our relations with the West are not, don't relate or don't rest on economic, not only on economic and military ties, but also on liberal values. So basically, there were some which were much more clearer regarding the warnings and responses, such as the US. President Biden gave the cold shoulder to Netanyahu for many months, didn't invite him just until recently to the White House, but also stated that this judicial reform should achieve this compromise deal. And this is the main thing that he said, and many other countries from the West also say that. And all this international commotion is like trickling down to Israel society, because based on our index, 45% of the public noted that this international criticism has greatly affected their positions and their views on the judicial overall plan. So it seems that this notion of this government that this issue is only a domestic or only an internal issue, most of the public believes that that this local crisis is related to a bigger crisis, a broader crisis. The democratic backsliding that is occurring everywhere between liberal Democrats and ultra conservatives and nationalists. So if in the past the Israeli public would have stood against criticism of the Palestinian issue, it seems that today some most of them maybe are adopting the positions and the concerns of the West. So now we'll move on to the second infographic here, and the connection between the occupation and the judicial overall. So basically, almost half of the public, 49%, believes that there is a connection between the two, and the Israeli public increasingly aware how these institutional frameworks influence the moral deterioration in the West Bank, such as the crimes and violence carried by Jewish settlers in the West Bank and Hawara specifically. So I would say after years of closing its eyes, the liberal camp is starting to realize the impact of the occupation on the liberal democratic identity of Israel. And although there are many inside the camp which don't fully agree with the statements, the very existence of the debate is important in itself. And in the meantime, you have a government which, doesn't really hide its true intentions. You have very radical ministers at the Ministry of Defense and the National Security. And for the past year, they've been trying to promote all these kind of resolutions and decisions and laws. For example, the repeal of the disengagement law or the NGO funding law, which limits and harms civil society organization function, mainly those which are related to the humanitarian causes, or like with humanitarian causes or civil rights. So basically, I would say that the musts are starting to be removed, and it's not just around the occupation itself, because I believe, or it seems that the liberal camp is suddenly understanding the innate handicaps within Israel's democracy. It's not just occupation, it's also Jewish supremacy, and also the deep impact of ultra-Orthodox in the public sphere. And I will conclude with the final insight, which is very related to the first one, that the liberal camp understands that it can't win this fight by itself. It has to find allies and other camps elsewhere to learn from them, to share experiences, and to work together to fight against this democratic backsliding phenomenon. Because this democratic backsliding phenomenon can happen anywhere and anytime. It's not just only Hungary and Poland and Turkey. It can happen also in Netherlands and elsewhere. And this is why it's very important that the civil society organization will take this initiative to connect the gap between the liberal political leadership and mistrust of the public. The civil society organization has the capabilities of research and actions, like political actions. And this is why Mitvim, we took on the challenge. And recently also we trying to promote different international efforts, for example, creating this network of think and do tanks to understand each other, to learn from other experiences. And I'm going to elaborate it in the end, but we're going also to participate in a very exciting conference at the European Parliament in Brussels, alongside with other civil society organizations from Eastern Europe to launch a new platform for civil society organization. So I will explain about it later on. So yeah, that's my take. And Frankie, back to you.
Frankie, just an important point to emphasize something that Reef said. It might be literally, I wouldn't say a game changer, but a lead to something big. Normally, when we speak about international criticism, and most of you diplomats, and I think also international media people in the audience knows that mostly when we speak about international criticism about Israeli policy, mainly on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict issue, the Israeli public response is either hostility or to ignore this type of criticism. And here we see something completely different. A sort of a public openness, I would say, or a perception of the international criticism as part of the game. And maybe an understanding that this is basically Israel is one case study, a part of a much broader fight between liberal democracies and anti-liberal democracies. And this is something that goes against any expectation that we have when we speak about the Israeli public and international feedback. So that might be a unique case, something that, when we think about future segues and paths of activity, this is an important take. So just to emphasize this point, Reef, again, couldn't help myself. Frankie, sorry, back to you.
No, you're good. So I want to open it up for a Q&A now. There are a few questions already up here right now, so I'm going to start with those. Omer, we have a question here for you from Dora Bender. She says there are new creative solutions today to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, such as a confederation or federation. Why are those not part of the discussion?
Well, thank you for the question. For me, in a way, it's a threat, those new ideas, because they are connected to the vision of one state, which I think, is the big threat for Israel. We have to look and to learn lessons from the past and to give a new agenda of the two-state solution, which is more regional. And we see the support of the regional involvement in the Palestinian arena. This is something very important. The public is saying to us, not only in the Gaza Strip, even in Jerusalem, we are prepared for an involvement of regional actors, not only Jordan, but even other actors. So I think we have to think very clearly, and we're trying to do it today, what is the best way to bring the two-state solution to the table. No one talks about a new agenda, but still maintaining the idea of the two-state solution. And I'm sure when we'll have such an agenda, so the numbers will be much different, and we'll see a decrease in the number of the one-state agenda. Now, about the confederation, which is a different approach, the confederation, just to remind all of you, the confederation is based on the solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by the two-state solution. It talks only about the next stage, which has to be more confederated, more with cooperation between the parties, etc. But it's not a one-state solution. But to my eyes, again, the real issue is a Palestinian state, a viable Palestinian state, the two-state solution, and we should take into consideration what will be the next step. It can be a confederation, but the main idea is a two-state solution. That's my answer. Thank you.
And by the way, the survey shows, to strengthen Omer's point, the survey actually shows a very small percentage, I think 13%, if I'm not mistaken, that actually support such a thing. Right. So, I mean, if we speak about a feasible solution, and by the way, we checked, and out of these 13, most of them are right-wingers that support one state. Even within the, let's say, the radical left in Israel, the left in Israel, it is not seen as a viable strategy at this time. So even when we speak about feasibility of promoting confederation in this time and day, it is still seen as a fringe option. It might be an interesting idea, in order to exchange insights, but still not something that Israeli audience is willing to even consider among the universe of possible solutions at that moment.
With your permission, Gil, I want to add another point, which we raised in a seminar that we made. I think even in a way, those idea of one-state solution that comes from the left side are giving legitimacy to the what we call the mif'al ha'itnachluyot, the settlement factory, without any intentions to do so. But when you're talking about a solution that acknowledges the reality of a one-state solution, you're saying to the right-wingers, to Smotrich, to Ben-Gvir, to Netanyahu, go on with with what you're doing in annexing all the West Bank to Israel, which is politically is a very, very bad idea, to my opinion. Thank you.
Frankie, we can't hear you. You need to unmute.
Just talking to myself, don't worry. No, this was actually another question that I had for Omer. Something that you pointed out was that, Israelis in this survey, for the most part, gave a very clear message to the government that they see and understand the importance of the PA. And what I would like for you to talk about is how do Israelis see the role of the PA in peacemaking? How has that changed over the last few years? And today, given the state of the government, how do they see the role of the PA?
Well, the idea is basically talking about in the field of interests. So basically, I think when we're talking about interest, is who is responsible for 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank. I think that the main answer, and I don't have numbers, but what you're asking, what's the rationale behind those higher numbers of seeing the Palestinian Authority as a very important issue? I think most of them are thinking about taking control again over about 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank. They're not thinking what I think should be, and we're riding on it. I think it should be also the only possibility for a future Palestinian state, because it's not talking about the reality of, not only talking about the reality of today. This is, as I said, this is a mirror image against the big threat for Smotrich and Ben-Gvir's plan that see the PA as the biggest enemy. So I think the idea that the datas are very good. You're talking about the rationale behind it. I think it's mostly because the public is not thinking about the two-state solution. Mostly, I think they think about pragmatic approach and not taking responsibility, civilian and security responsibility, for millions of Palestinians that live in A areas and in B areas in the West Bank.
Thank you, Omer. And certainly to your point and to Dora, your comment here, we need creative thinking and out-of-the-box thinking. There's been a lot of the same ideas thrown around for years now. So definitely. I'm going to move on to another question we have here for Maya. Yes, for Maya. What is a more effective strategy for the EU, given that friendly relations do not promote peace? Yeah, we can go with that.
Well, so thanks for the question. I'm going back to what I said after Moran's intervention, and I alluded to the special privilege partnership that Joseph Borrell is trying to promote. He wrote an op-ed about that in March, and now tried to promote it as well in September. He met with the Arab leagues, with Arab countries, with Saudi Arabia mostly, and spoke about his joint initiative. He visited Saudi Arabia, both on other issues. But well, I think Borrell, if I try to read politically, what's going on, then I think Borrell tries to keep friendly relations with this government, despite the fact that it is, again, the most right-wing extreme government. And Gil opened the date, with the coalition agreement that states that religious Zionism views its right into the entirely state of Israel. So in that sense, I think Borrell still tries to maintain good relations in order to be able to promote the special privilege partnership together with Saudi Arabia, together with the United States. Otherwise, I find it hard to explain these friendly relations. We could explain a little bit about Ukraine, about how Israel is supplying gas through Egypt to Europe, but this is really small quantities. It is supplying a lot of weapon now to Europe, so other member states has more interest to stay in good terms with Israel. And the Palestinian issue has dropped considerably in its importance in the agenda of the EU. They have other concerns now with the Russian war against Ukraine, with energy prices, with the right extreme political parties rising up in Europe itself. So they have their own problems, the fight with China, etc. And so in that respect, the special privilege partnership would be like a really small carrot that would not be a make or break of any deal with Saudi Arabia or with the Palestinians, but it could be a nice added value for maybe small portions of the Israelis to be a bit more convinced about a solution with or promoting some, some sort of not solution, but alleviating or improving the conditions of life of Palestinians. So it could be an added value to the whole package, but it doesn't stand in itself.
Sorry, we have a follow-up question here for you. I'm not, yeah, it's half a question here, but what would be needed before such options could be seriously considered? I'm trying to figure out where in your sentence she was catching you. Barbara, if you could maybe type in another question here, we'll loop back around to you. And I want to pass to Gil if we have a question here that I think was pretty relevant to some of the topics that you had gone over. From Michael Goldstein, do right-wing members of the Knesset have any concern about views of US Jews on the judicial coup and the occupation / looming annexation?
Yeah, this is a continuation, I would tell the audience, of a discussion that Michael and I have for quite a while now. And actually, I think that the question is which parts of this Jewish audience are actually viewing the criticism, because there's a big question if this judicial reform, the new steps or the attempt to challenge the status quo in the West Bank has really broken or were able to somewhat shatter the old dividing lines between the more critical side of US Jewry and the let's say the more right-wing supportive and so on part of US Jewry. And the eyes were mainly on the AIPAC question, whether or not we see the old bastion of supporting Israel by all means, if they in some ways are being challenged. I didn't see such a challenge yet. And when the right wing is looking at Jewish support in the US, that's mainly where they're looking. I do believe that what we've seen during Netanyahu's visit and in the demonstration is a lot of voices that we haven't heard before joining into the discussion. So we kept the old, maybe the separation between the J Street camp on the one hand and the AIPAC camp on the other hand, but there's many new actors that are now leaning or supporting the critical camp against Israeli policy, of course. We're talking about Israeli policy, not the state of Israel. And differentiating between criticism of Israel and between delegitimization of Israel. You really see a lot of actors from the Jewish and the Israeli community, by the way. They used to be either sit idly by or tend to support Israel on a relative terms, are now on the side of now issuing or taking a very critical stance against this government, mainly because of the issue of the judicial reform. But I would separate it two camps. One camp that is looking at AIPAC, one camp that is looking at its old bastions of support and maybe recalculating. And there's an entire camp within I would say the radical right, but the mainstream of the radical right is now part of this government and the cabinet that completely ignores the US position. This is the mind your own business camp. That even in some cases, you've seen demonstrations against the dependency over the US. So I wouldn't call it a reorientation altogether, but a new approach towards critics. And then, completely ignoring, in this case, trying to devaluate the importance of the US position altogether. So that will be my short answer to the very complex question that Michael is presenting here.
Very good. Thank you, Gil. We have another question here. Maybe Moran or Omer, this one could be for you. Were any poll questions asked about allowing Arab partners to help administer West Bank / Palestinian affairs? For example, Jordan, Saudi, UAE. I believe we touched on this in one of the slides, but if either of you want to dive deeper into it.
Well, I'll just say briefly that we didn't ask that question. Basically, on 1988, we lost the opportunity of giving back the territories to King Hussein. Well, he went out of the territory. He understood that he wouldn't get what he wanted from Israel, and we're stuck with the Palestinians. A different question would be, what kind of involvement should we have in a peace agreement? Should it be the regular bilateral approach between Israelis and Palestinians, or we should think differently and talk with the Saudis, with the Jordanians, maybe with the Egyptians about the what we call the Sugyot Aliba, the core issues. Talk about the core. In each and every one of the core issues, they can be involved and help us with getting a final solution. For example, in the security, a different approach towards the Jordan River, and the Israeli approach about the Jordan River, Jerusalem, which we've mentioned earlier, and of course the economic side. So there should be, and maybe Gil, this is for us something to think about for the future, a kind of a poll, maybe to do not only yearly a poll, but also to include in it more specific question about the involvement of the regional specific states and the regional approach as a whole.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Omer. There's another question here, which I think is going to be another, to tag on what Omer said, that we need to add that into the index. This question says, are there any questions which assess the willingness of Israelis to negotiate and move beyond their opening position? Gil, you can take this, but I don't believe that we have a specific question for this. Yeah, I was going to say my general opinion is we have that space in there. There's people who have, they're unsure, they don't sway one way or another. And I think there's a good amount of Israelis that answered in that way. So yeah, go ahead.
Well, actually, the answer to the question, do we have the question, is yes and no. We don't have a question, stating literally, on the core positions, for example, are you willing in some kind of, because we identify, I think Omer made a very good point about it when we ask Israelis about the preferred, what is your core positions? The one that you may be able to jump beyond. And Israelis are now in a state, I would say, of a total, I would say positive embarrassment, or a situation when they are having a hard time to define the new approach or any kind of strategic approach. However, we do ask, and this is part of the new paradigm that we are trying to build of evolving peace. We do ask about Israeli agreement or Israeli positions about specific steps that are, distinctively about building a two-state solution reality in the future. We had at least 3 questions in this survey. One that deals with building a shared mechanism in Jerusalem, Israeli, Palestinian, Jordanian. One that speaks about providing the Palestinians with energy security, energy independence, sorry. Okay, and one that speaks about cooperation with the Palestinian on climate change. And each one of them, Israelis, when they deal with the practical steps, has to step beyond the limitations and offer something to the Palestinians that would shape the political future, not just the quality of life issues, but the political. And in each case, we see a decisive support, including by those, you see about 56% of Israelis that support providing the Palestinians with energy independence, as Omer said, completely changing the power relations between Israel and the Palestinians and building the state capacities for a future Palestinian state. But we have only 36 that support a two-state solution. So to answer your question, are they willing to move beyond their initial position, yes, but when you speak about practice, when you speak about practical steps, not the entire package, not by offering new positions for a comprehensive agreement. That's the state of affairs that it is. And one of the things we're trying to do is doing that, to try and build a bottom-up a vision for peace. And that's, of course, the evolving peace that Omer is the paradigm that Omer is trying to build. So we are very encouraged by this public support when it comes to practical steps that has a political meaning in the future.
Thank you, Gil. So I'm going to bring it on over to Reef for our conclusion. He's going to talk about some upcoming events that we have and to close out the session today. But again, thank you everyone for joining us, for your wonderful questions, and of course to all of our speakers. Thank you so much for your expertise and your time today. Reef, why don't you go ahead? Oh,
All right.
You're on mute.
Yeah. Okay. I saw them. So our index and findings are still going to stay with us for a long time now, and as part of the upcoming events. So the first event, which is very special for us, is the Celebration for Democracy on October 11th. We're going to participate alongside civil society organizations from Eastern Europe to celebrate democracy, to share experiences, and to ask ourselves how to tackle this democratic backsliding phenomenon and how to address it. And the main purpose of this conference is to launch a new civil society platform for all kinds of organizations, whether they are think tanks or whether are activist organizations, and just to foster cooperation between ourselves and to support each other in our democratic struggle. So we're going to have very special guests in this event. And also we're going to hold a rally outside the parliament, which is going to be super special. And also all this going to broadcast live, and we're going to share the videos through our social media channels. And Frankie, if you can also link the information regarding the event, it will be wonderful. And people who are in Brussels also are welcome to the rally and everything. So this is the first event. And of course, the second event, which is also very special for us, is the annual conference on November 21st in Israel at Rabin Center. And this year, we're going to discuss about a new foreign policy paradigm for liberal democracy, and how can we develop that, and how can we develop different alternatives to this government, which promoting other things in mind. So we're going to invite very interesting guests alongside our talented experts, and one of our guests is going to be the former Prime Minister and former Foreign Minister, Yair Lapid. So you are very welcome if you're in Israel, and we are looking forward to seeing you all. And that's it.
Online, of course.
And online.
Online.
Sorry. Right. And that's it. So I would like to thank you all for dedicating your time here. And I really hope that this briefing was beneficial for us, for you, whether you're working or in general. So we're going to upload this video on our social media and website, so you can always visit again to see and hear our experts. So thank you very much. Have happy holidays, Shana Tova, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Shana Tova.